I want to start off with the trade deal, which is obviously the big headline news story today. How good of a deal is this? How good of a deal is this for the global markets, for the insurance industry, and how good of a deal is it for Allianz?
The last thing I cannot answer, but I think the good news is that we finally have some agreements between the governments after a long time of insecurity. So it's a good step in the right direction. I'm not yet sure it's a huge step, but at least it's the beginning of a walk in the right direction.
In the past, you've said that China has needed to do more, particularly when it comes to approving licenses for the insurance industry. Are you getting a more receptive response now for regulators here, and how much of that potentially is down to the pressure that China's been under?
Mr. Xi Jinping has mentioned in Boao Forum 2018 that specifically that the government would like to open up the financial services industry, and he has been true to his promise. He has delivered, and the government has delivered. And we do feel stronger support, particularly here from the Shanghai government, but also from the regulators in Beijing. So indeed, the question is, yes, we're getting more support, and we are the first foreign insurance company to be able to set up a fully owned holding company. So that's a manifestation of the change. Now, there is a lot more to be done. So for example, for us to be able to expand our licenses, it's still a province by province exercise. And if you think about that, the fact that China is moving into the digital economy quickly, and you want to tell your consumers that your insurance company that serves you in Shanghai where you live, now that you over the Chinese New Year go back to your parents, we can serve you because you don't have a local license in a province where your parents live, that's a bit an odd thing. So we're hoping that this process also gets changed and accommodated in a way that actually matches China's ambition to be the leading digital economy.
And I wonder, given the nature of this trade deal between the US and China, is there a risk that European companies may face some bias as China focuses now on approving licenses for their US businesses and counterparts over and above Europeans? Is that a potential risk tied to this deal?
I wouldn't see that, because actually China, and I wish the US was the same, has really committed to multilateralism. So most of the things the Chinese governments do, they always say that isn't part of the WTO rules and applies to everybody. So my assumption is that they also stay true to the promise that whatever they do in a multilateral way. So I'm optimistic. And the second reason why I'm optimistic is China has a very strong relationship to my home country, to Germany. And we're working very hard to make sure that that very strong relationship becomes even stronger.
You mentioned that you are, of course, now officially the first foreign insurance company to have a fully owned holding company in China. What opportunities does that open up for you? Where are the revenue streams going to be coming from the Chinese market?
So the first one, it actually allows us to harness synergies between the various businesses, because in the past we need to keep them separate. So there are significant cost savings attached to having a unified approach to the marketplace. It allows us, secondly, to expand into other businesses that we were not able to get into, particularly, for example, insurance asset management. Remember, Allianz is also one of the largest asset managers in the world, not just an insurance company. And we see the investment side now as the next horizon, maybe even more important than insurance, because China, as it grows into its global role, will have to come to terms with how it does invest abroad. And it needs support, in our opinion, in terms of how to think through balancing risk and returns as they put their money to work outside of China. And we're happy to help.
So you've got the holding company, but to fully take advantage of that asset management prospect that you outlined there, what are you doing in terms of adding headcount? How much are you investing in that part of the business?
Oh, we're adding significantly. We have been here in a long time, but we also, by the way, need additional licenses, going back to the point we had earlier. So the holding license is the entry ticket, but we still need fund licenses, for example, to operate beyond what we have today. We need an insurance asset management specific license. So we're in the process of preparing that.
Okay.
Once we have those, I can more specifically answer when and how many people. But we are full steam in terms of investing in building the presence.
You have taken a 4% stake in Taikang, one of the biggest insurance companies in China. How do you plan to leverage that stake?
Well, we're still waiting for the approvals, the formal approvals in February. So once we have that, I can tell you more about that. But for us, it's a very important and strategic investment. That is as much as I can say before we have the official approval.
Well, given that, and with that caveat, would you plan, once you get that approval, to potentially raise that stake?
I cannot tell you at this point in time. Because we first steps first. Sorry for being very careful here.
No, understood. In terms of deals, you of course made 2 deals in the UK last year, one in Brazil and the 4% stake here in China. You're looking for non-life businesses. You have excess cash on the balance sheet. Why do you think it's been so difficult to find appropriate targets?
We have very high valuations in almost all asset classes today, to put it mildly. Some people are saying we have overvalued assets almost everywhere. And therefore, when an investor comes to us or a banker and says, we have this beautiful insurance company, can you buy it? It's relatively cheap. Relatively cheap means relative to other listed companies. It doesn't mean that it's really not very expensive relative to its underlying cash flow generation power. So we are extremely disciplined to put our money to work on behalf of our investors. And we have looked at many, many opportunities. Very few have really made it in terms of financial returns relative to the risk involved. And we will remain very disciplined to deploy the capital of our investors, even going forward.
Which regions are you looking at for deal making? Are there regions, presumably there are, where valuations do look more attractive?
No, actually globally valuations are very high. What we do look for is typically what we call partnership deals. So what is common to all transactions that you have mentioned is that we have established relationships to these partners over many years. We've built trust. They're typically not auctions. So we participate in transactions where we can really balance the interest of the buyer and the seller in a good way that allows us not to overpay and actually fairly share the synergies out of these transactions. And that's very rare these days.
Are you still looking at BBVA, the non-life unit in Spain?
We never make any comments, as you know, particularly not in the public, about specific transactions. I do apologize.
Oh, no problem. But broadly, should we expect a tick up in deal activity from Allianz in 2020?
It depends on again, as the opportunity. We really systematically look. We have a very active strategy department, very active M&A department. It will depend on the specificity of the opportunity. So I cannot answer in that the activity is up. It has to make sense for both sides. And again, given where asset valuations are, we'd rather be cautious. Buying high and selling low should not be part of my strategy program.
So bolt-on acquisitions rather than pulling the trigger on a big deal?
Yeah, that's what we generally said. If it's very difficult to do smaller transactions, think about how difficult it would be to create value with very large transactions.
Switching focus to the asset management business. In the third quarter, strong inflows into PIMCO, 22 billion euros, but outflows of about 4 billion euros for Allianz Global Investors. What does that divergence tell you about the business?
Not much. Actually, it's more related to how specific asset classes and investment styles have performed. Some have benefited strongly from the sentiment, and obviously PIMCO is an amazing firm, as we all know. Their investment performance has been particularly strong. On the Allianz Global Investor side, there were a few styles that have not benefited. The investment performance was not so strong, and we need to make sure that we're performing at the best of the market. That will drive inflows, and that will drive profitability over time. Despite the outflows, by the way, AGI, and we'll publish the numbers in February, I believe will have done very well for our shareholders and our clients in last year. But let's wait for the results in February, and then we'll show you.
Sources told Bloomberg that Allianz was looking at potentially combining its asset management business with Deutsche Bank's DWS. Did those conversations take place?
Interesting that you also sort of M&A rumors. I think everybody talks to everybody, so that is not a surprise. But a specific combination, I can tell you, did not take place.
Is it fair to say that you're looking to bulk up the asset management business?
We're always looking at, as you asked earlier, about thinking about scaling up the businesses that are very good. So yes, indeed, we feel that our asset management business would benefit from larger scale, but we are not desperate to do anything. We feel that overall we are strong enough to go it ourselves. But in fact, what your question implies is, my personal opinion is that the asset management industry needs to consolidate further. There's a lot of Me Too players, particularly in the banking industry. But it's very tough because it's a high ROE business and people like to hold on to it as long as they can. But my personal expectation is consolidation will take place. It's just a matter of time.
But that pressure from passive investing, from the price squeezes, that's continuing? You expect that to continue?
Yes, that's one area. Price pressure certainly will continue. It's also to think about not just investment alpha. You have to think about the fact that if you run a global investment firm, the whole security side, the whole compliance side has to be up to the IT systems, need to be scalable and fully reliable. And you need what we call client alpha. You need to make sure that you actually add value to the distributors in a way that goes beyond putting product on a shelf. And asset managers that are trying to be global find it more and more difficult to have investment alpha, client alpha, and operational alpha and to deliver that. And that's why we believe we are very well positioned to be partners in this consolidation play.
More broadly, do you expect the rates environment to improve, or are we in a new normal?
If I knew what the interest rates would look like 5 years down now, would have a different job. But on a more serious note, we expect and plan for rates to stay lower for longer. And we have been adapting our strategy to a lower for longer environment for quite a few years already. Otherwise, we'd be in trouble, as other people are today. And that is the basis for our strategies. So we are not betting on rates rising anytime soon. Despite the fact that particularly in Europe, we believe, and I've said it all along, that the way the interest rates are set centrally by the ECB is just plainly wrong for the economy. The outcomes that they are promising will not come. They will not be higher investments. It will not be. It's actually mostly benefiting those in the market that have too much leverage. So the misallocation of capital is increasing by the day. The missteering of global capital flows is increasing by the day, and the risks are building. So we hope that we see at some time some thinking and then some action in terms of rectifying the situation.
Yeah, well, you've been critical of the former ECB president, Mario Draghi, about politicizing, as you said, monetary policy. Do you have more faith in Christine Lagarde?
No, it's not about the people. I'm glad that you're asking. I have not been criticizing Mario Draghi. You know, he's not making decisions by himself as the ECB council. It's the ECB policy, what we believe is fundamentally flawed. They try to bring inflation, and when you look at the right measures of inflation, the ECB policy hasn't done that. They try to stimulate investment by transferring money into the banking system and increasing lending. That hasn't happened. And the negative outcome that particularly savers are being defrauded of their savings and their return, that actually has happened. So we have seen financial repression, that's the word that has to be used, for the last number of years, and particularly Germans, but everybody who's saving have been paying the bill. And I think very soon people will vote in a way that make their anger felt much more strongly than in the past.
Let me switch focus. The bushfires in Australia, obviously hugely damaging for the ecosystem there, and obviously people's homes and lives and communities. How much is it costing your Australian business? What are claims looking like at this point?
So the first and the most important comment is that we are really, really sorry for all of the lives that are lost, not just human beings, also the animals. There have been, hundreds of millions of animal life lost, huge amounts of land devastated, and that is really terrible. And as an insurer, we are always very worried when these things happen. Now, to say is often these bushfires do not come with huge insurance claims because Australia is actually very well prepared for bushfires. The way the fire brigades work and others actually prevent huge insurance losses to incur. So I cannot give you a specific number, but we don't expect large losses out of these fires. Neither for us nor for the industry at large to be tremendously large.